The Bensonite bridge isn't the newest kid on the block, but it hasn't been around as long as the Staytrem or the Mastery, which has sort of become the staple replacement bridges for the Jazzmaster and Jaguar for the past decade or so. So I've done a few videos in the past about different Jazzmaster bridge options. A couple of years ago, I did one on the various versions that are out there. I did one specifically on the Staytrem bridge, and most recently, I did one on the Geiger Roller Jazzmaster bridge. Because of this, Kendal, who makes the Bensonite Jazzmaster bridge, reached out to me to ask if I wanted to give it a try. I said, heck yes, for sure, and here we are. So we're going to take a closer look at the Bensonite bridge, unbox it, run down the specs, and perhaps most importantly, compare it directly to the Staytrem bridge, which just so happens to be the bridge I've had on my personal Jazzmaster for the past couple of years. Be sure to stick around to the end of the video to hear my thoughts on the bridge and about a little situation I encountered along the way. All right, let's take a closer look at this Bensonite Jazzmaster or Jaguar bridge. Cut it open here. Okay, first things first, this bridge is pretty much a derivative or based off of the Mustang bridge, as is the Staytrem bridge that we'll take a look at a little bit later here. I want to point out that it is a rocking bridge, so it rocks within the thimbles as the original Jazzmaster or Jaguar bridge was intended to do. The radius, there's options for this bridge. The radius comes in your typical 7 1/4, 9 1/2 inch, or 12-inch radius. And if you're not familiar with the radius, that is essentially the curvature of the fretboard. On top of the fretboard, that's the strings follow, and that is pretty much what that correlates to. On the saddles, that is the radius that they follow. So when we talk about radius, that's what we're talking about there. Now let's talk about the bridge itself. The base plate, the brass that you see here is just that. It is solid raw brass. You can also get it as an option in nickel, so nickel plating on top of the raw brass. And interesting thing is that it's rounded off, you know, on all these edges for comfort. So if you look on this side here, I don't think it's going to focus, but maybe I can put up a picture or something that shows it better. The edges are, like I said, rounded for comfort. So, you know, if your hand's in contact with the bridge, you're palm muting or what have you, you're not going to encounter any kind of discomfort or sharp edges. So that's a nice little detail there. The saddles are stainless steel and they are bead blasted. And the purpose of that is so that the strings don't slide on the saddles themselves. You want the strings to grip the saddles so that the whole bridge rocks back and forth and you don't have any string slippage that might cause tuning issues. And they are machined for a tight fit. In other words, they don't slide around within the bridge plate itself. They're tight in there so that there's no play back and forth. That's something that Kendal has emphasized on his website about the way these are set up and machined. And they also have deep grooves so that your string doesn't pop out when you're doing bends. Now, speaking of the string grooves, I will say that there is sort of a version 2 of this bridge, whereas this one, I think I have the version 1. I can't be positive, but I'm pretty sure I do for a couple of reasons. But one of the changes on the sort of second iteration of the bridge is that on the higher E strings, the groove is more of a V shape so that there's less chance of it sliding out or slipping. Whereas on the low E strings, and I think actually, yeah, just the unwound strings, there's more of a V cut. And then on the lower strings, the wound string, there is still a U cut. It just makes it for a better fit for each individual string. And the other sort of iteration of the new bridge or the new version, it's not a really big change. The groove is one thing. And then also on the low E string, whereas before you might not get the far a travel as you want back towards the end of the guitar. If you need to for intonation, if you needed before to move this back, and I think it's the case with this bridge, I don't think I'm going to have an issue with my guitar, but for example, if you needed to move that back, with this one, the spring might be in the way, and then the edge of this saddle here is sort of it's not sharp, but it's, you know, it's a straight line, whereas the bridge plate curves, and so you're limited. You can't get the saddle all the way back to the edge here because of that. Now in the new version, Kendal has addressed that. He's kind of cut this at an angle so that it can fit better into the edge of the plate. And he's also, I think, made the spring a little bit shorter so that there's more travel there. So let's talk about the post a little bit. Now, I believe the reason that these are two different lengths is essentially due to the height of your bridge, right? So in other words, if you are using these screws and you find out that your bridge is setting up too high, you need to lower it, well, these might stick out too far up and they would cause you to rub your hand against it. It might be painful or in the way. And in that case, you would move to these shorter posts. So it depends on your guitar, your setup. If you have, a neck shim, if you need one, all those sort of personal things for your guitar. Now, these Allen wrenches, one is for the intonation screws on the back of the bridge here. So just as you would think, actually, I am wrong. These are for the soft touch, I guess you call them. No, they're called soft tip screws that set or lock the bridge onto the post. So that is what this one is for. And then this one is for these posts for the height. In other words, once you get it on there, you can adjust the height of your bridge up and down using these. So I am going to go ahead and install these now into the bridge. I'm not sure which ones I'm going to need. For the sake of this, let's just put the shorter ones in and put these longer ones to the side. Okay, here we go with these. Yeah, so like I said, this smaller Allen key is to tighten down on these soft tipped set screws. So I'm assuming that means, I'm not sure actually. I may pull these all the way out to see kind of like what they're made of. I don't know if this end is soft, like rubbery. I can't really tell, or if the end that's touching the post itself is the soft part. I'm just not sure. But anyway, you would use this Allen key to set or lock down the bridge onto the post. And so with this one, you have two different Allen keys, of course, like you said, one for the post and one for the locking of the post onto the bridge. Now, some of your basic measurements here, the string spacing on this Bensonite bridge is 52 millimeters, which is kind of the preferred string spacing from what I understand. And that is so that your string spacing is not too wide where your strings might slip off the edges of the fretboard. So like I said, 52 millimeters is sort of the preferred, and that's what the Staytrem is as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Also, the post spacing here to here is 73 millimeters, and that is of course typical for pretty much all Jazzmasters and Jaguars with the rocking type bridge. The only other thing I can think of to talk about regarding this bridge is the price. The solid brass base plate version of this is $125, and the nickel-plated version is $140. And while I'm thinking about it, I am going to take out these set screws just to kind of see what material they're made out of. So here we go. I'm just going to take out one. I don't think that's necessary to take out the other. So yeah, it looks like on this end of it is sort of maybe a plastic, hard plastic, and then this end is your typical, or the main part of it is just metal like you'd expect. And then that's the, I guess, soft tip. So that, and the reason behind that is that so that it doesn't mar the threads of the post, because you wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want it to damage those to where you couldn't thread it up and down, or the bridge up and down on the post. So that is the reasoning behind that. And that's a pretty cool feature. Okay, so of course, to do our comparison here, we need to take a closer look at the Staytrem bridge, and here we have it. So this one is also based after the Mustang bridge, and really the saddles is the story behind that. The Mustang bridge was, I guess, the first to kind of introduce these larger saddles that kind of resemble the Jazzmaster Jaguar bridge, but have a better setup for string slippage and popping out of the saddles. Of course, the original Jazzmaster Jaguar bridge had those like threaded type where has a lot of grooves on it and a lot of opportunity for the strings to pop out. So this one, of course, is rocking as well as the original bridge was intended to be. The options for the radius for these is 7 1/4 and 9 1/2. So unlike the Bensonite, this one is limited to only 2 radiuses and there is no option, at least right now, for a 12-inch radius. Now, one thing I do like about this is that it is actually stamped on the bottom of this. So, I mean, it's not likely that you're going to forget which bridge you have. But if you were ever going to sell the bridge, on the reverb or something like that, you could at least, show and prove that, yeah, this is a, 9.5 or 7.25-inch radius, and kind of prove it. Of course, you could always measure the tops of the saddles as well, and that would be easy enough. But it's just kind of a nice feature that it is stamped on the bottom there. So one of the main differences in the Staytrem and the Bensonite is the bridge plate. I don't know if you can tell here, but this one is pretty thin. It is kind of typical, I believe, of at least sort of the shape and size of the traditional Jazzmaster Jaguar bridge, whereas the Bensonite plate is really thick and heavy. This one is, more traditional and thin. The saddles are stainless, just like the Bensonite bridge. They do have the deep grooves, just like the Bensonite one and the Mustang saddles, which again is sort of to help your strings not to pop out of the saddles whenever you're doing bends. So let's talk about the posts a little bit. They actually have these plastic pieces here, these surroundings, or maybe you would call them a jacket or something. But essentially, it just surrounds the post. The posts, like the Bensonite, are threaded. As you can see here, of course, they need to move up and down. The ones on the original Jazzmaster had this sort of metal sheath, I guess, and then a tiny set screw that came out the bottom. But these are more girthy, not as girthy as the Bensonite ones, because here they are. So you can kind of tell the difference there. These guys are a lot bigger for the Bensonite, but regardless, these plastic surroundings are to make sure that the bridge doesn't slide on these posts and inadvertently lower itself. And that's the same reason that the Bensonite has the set screws to tighten the bridge down onto the post. Same reason here. These plastic pieces are so that the bridge doesn't move. So as with the Bensonite bridge, the string spacing on this guy is 52 millimeters. And then the post spacing is 73 millimeters, which is of course the preferred string spacing and the standard post spacing. So regarding the adjustment of the Staytrem, you basically have one Allen key or wrench, and it does two things. So first of all, you can use it for the intonation here on your set screws, and you have the same Allen key for the height of your post. Whereas the Bensonite has two. This is a little bit easier to keep up with, but regardless, you're gonna have to keep up with one Allen key or another, but the Staytrem just has one for both. The other kind of cool feature of the Staytrem is that these intonation screws are offset from the grooves of the saddles. So if you can see here, of course, this groove here is in line with my Allen wrench, same here. And so the screws for the intonation of the saddles are offset from your strings so that you're not getting, the strings are not in the way when you're trying to set the intonation, which is a pretty nice feature. Otherwise, you'd be fighting against the string one way or the other, having to maybe loosen it, pull it off, tighten it, retune it, all that jazz. So they really thought of that when they were making these and putting these intonation screws in their place. Oh, and one last thing about the Staytrem, we talked about price for the Bensonite bridge. The Staytrem bridge currently is at $95 as compared to the $125, $140 for the Bensonite. But the thing about the Staytrem is there is an 8-month wait. You heard that right. 32 weeks, 8 months to wait to get one of these, which is crazy. But, the thing about these is you don't really see them pop up on Reverb or for sale on eBay, things like that, because people like them and they use them and they keep them. So I'm lucky to have one. For a time there, they weren't even selling to the US, and I had to wait myself until I could order one. And I'm glad I did. It's been a really good bridge, and I'm really excited to compare it to the Bensonite and see what the differences are between the two. So obviously I've got the Bensonite bridge on a little bit different background here, and I was looking closer at it, and I do in fact have the version 2 or the newest version of this bridge. And the reason being, I looked here, and I'm going to zoom in here. If you look right there, you can see that the saddle is actually sort of machined with a curvature there so that it will go back flush, or, as flush as possible against the corner of this bridge. So that feature tells me that this is the version 2 bridge. And also you can see the grooves here. So this one here is obviously a U shape, and U shape, U shape, U shape. And then we get here to the non-wound strings, and we've got a V, V, V. So that tells me that yes, this is in fact the newest version of the Bensonite bridge. Let me swap this out for the Staytrem and we'll take a closer look at those saddles. So here is the Staytrem bridge starting on the low E string over here. You can see that that's pretty much a U shape. And then as we move over here, a U shape, and then it sort of gradually moves into a V there, a soft V, a little bit more there. And then over here on the high E string, it's pretty much a straight V. So it's interesting how they kind of gradually move from a U shape to a V shape on the Staytrem. So I did want to show these two side by side so you can kind of get a comparison just visually of the differences between the two and the similarities. And also I did weigh these. The Staytrem bridge weighed 2.2 ounces and the Bensonite weighed 4 ounces. So almost twice the amount of the Staytrem. I knew the Bensonite was going to weigh more. I didn't know it was going to weigh that much more than the Staytrem. Now 4 ounces isn't like super heavy. It's not like it's going to add a ton of weight to your guitar if you're worried about that, but it is substantially more mass than the Staytrem. I don't know if that's going to translate into more sustain. I'm kind of hoping it does. That was one thing. Looking into the mastery, I was intrigued by the amount of sustain that the mastery is supposed to give, but it was just too much money and all that for me, and that's why I went with the Staytrem. The Staytrem is stable, it's reliable, dependable, and it is a great bridge, but I'm hoping that the Bensonite will add a little bit of sustain and give that sort of edge. That's kind of what I prefer and want a little bit more out of my bridge, and so I'm hoping the Bensonite kind of fulfills that role. So after all that, what do I think about the Bensonite bridge? Well, first of all, I think it's extremely well made. I think it functions great and it looks, dare I say, sexy. I saw that description from Mark B on YouTube. Check out his channel. He's got a lot of great videos on Jazzmaster and Jaguar bridges, but I do agree with that description. So about this situation I ran into with the Bensonite bridge, as I was setting the bridge up, trying to dial in the intonation, I realized I couldn't get the G string and the low E string back far enough. It wasn't off by a lot, maybe 2 or 3 cents, which is perfectly fine in a lot of situations or most situations, but I wanted to get it just right. And so I realized I could only do that by sort of cocking the bridge back, and I'm going to show a picture here. And what I realized is I could play the guitar fine. I could bend strings, play notes, do the vibrato even, and the bridge would return back to the original position. So in the end, it wasn't really an issue. It was just more sort of a workaround, probably not the ideal situation. I know Kendal has worked towards improving the bridge, sort of cutting out, as we talked about earlier, that section behind the low E string. And I thought about this, I could have taken the springs out and shortened them, cut them up, or maybe taken them out completely and been able to have the bridge upright. But anyway, I just wanted to share that as my situation. Your situation could be different and it could be completely fine and you could have no issues. Every guitar is a little bit different. But like I said, I just want to be completely honest and share about that little hiccup I had. As far as the tone goes, I'll be completely honest. I didn't really hear much of a difference between the two bridges. And I think that's a good thing considering Staytrem's reputation. Theoretically, the Bensonite should have more sustain given its increased mass, but I really couldn't tell that. It wasn't apparent. And I think that has a lot to do with me just being human. I'm not a robot, so I can't produce consistent results. The pressure or the attack of the pick on the strings, the position of my picking hand closer to one pickup or the other can have a drastic impact on the tone or the sustain. So in the end, these things are really subjective, so take it with a grain of salt. So overall, I think the Bensonite bridge holds its own against the Staytrem and probably the Mastery as well. Plus, as a bonus, it costs way less than the Mastery and you're going to get it way faster than the Staytrem. So those are my thoughts, but what are your thoughts? I'm honestly interested in hearing your opinion. I don't want comments for comments' sake. I want to hear what you think. Maybe I'm off my rocker. Maybe you saw or heard something I didn't, and I like to hear about it. So thank you for watching, and thank you to Kendal for letting me test drive this Bensonite bridge.